Harry Eastlack was just 5 years old when he took a seemingly harmless fall while playing. A few days later, a painful lump appeared on the back of his neck. Doctors weren't too concerned, but the lump never went away. Instead, it hardened. Then his neck stiffened. Over the years, every bruise and every injury left him even more trapped inside his own body. By adulthood, he could barely move. Eventually, Harry died, and that's when doctors made a crazy discovery. His body had grown a second skeleton around the first. How could something like this even happen? How strange. I'm Elias. Let's find out. For most parents, the sound of a child crying after a fall is followed by relief. A kiss, a bandage, maybe an ice pack, and they just move on. But for a handful of families around the world, that same fall marked the beginning of a lifelong nightmare. The disease is called Fibrodysplasia Ossificans Progressiva, or FOP. It's so extraordinarily rare that fewer than 1,000 confirmed cases have been documented worldwide, but that doesn't mean that's just how many people have got it. Yet, for those who live with it, every ordinary bump, injection, or muscle injury carries a terrifying possibility, and that's because their bodies don't heal the way yours or mine do. They build bone where they never should. Muscles, ligaments, tendons, connective tissue. Little by little, these soft tissues transform into solid bone, locking joints in place until movement becomes impossible. In fact, the body doesn't even think it is attacking itself. It genuinely believes it's repairing damage, and one of the best-known faces of this disease belonged to Harry Raymond Eastlack Jr. By the way, if these kinds of stories are your thing, I'd love for you to subscribe. Now, where were we? Harry was born in Philadelphia on November 22nd, 1933. At birth, there was nothing dramatically unusual about him, except for one detail that doctors either overlooked or didn't recognize. His big toes were malformed, shorter than normal, and bent inward. Today, physicians recognize that as one of the earliest warning signs of FOP. But in the 1930s, almost no one knew what it meant. As Harry grew, strange swellings began appearing across his body. Painful lumps would emerge without explanation, often after seemingly minor injuries. Doctors searched for answers, but medicine simply wasn't equipped to understand what was happening. Like many patients of his era, Harry underwent surgeries intended to remove the mysterious growths. The procedures were performed with really good intentions, but they only made everything worse. Each operation created fresh trauma, and Harry's body responded the only way it knew how, by producing even more bone. Over time, his neck stiffened, then his shoulders, then his elbows. His spine also slowly lost flexibility. Eventually, turning his head became impossible. Raising an arm became impossible. Even opening his mouth grew increasingly difficult as bone formed around muscles that had once worked effortlessly. His skeleton kept growing, and it was trapping him. After enough observation on the disease, doctors now refer to these episodes as flare-ups. They often begin as painful swellings beneath the skin. Sometimes they're triggered by a fall, sometimes by a virus, sometimes by an injection into the muscle, and sometimes they seem to appear for no obvious reason at all. During a flare-up, new bone can permanently bridge one part of the body to another. A shoulder that once rotated freely may fuse to the chest. An elbow may become locked forever. Once the new bone forms, there is no surgery capable of safely removing it. Attempts to do so usually provoke even more bone growth and just create an even greater loss of movement. For decades, that cruel cycle baffled physicians, but still they wondered if the disease was turning muscles into bone. Why did certain muscles remain untouched? They noticed that his heart continued beating normally. His tongue never transformed, and the muscles controlling his eyes were mysteriously spared. Meanwhile, Harry continued adapting to a world that was becoming physically smaller with every passing year. Activities most people never think twice about, putting on a shirt, sitting comfortably in a chair, looking over a shoulder, slowly disappeared from his life. Yet those who knew him remembered something remarkable. But despite relentless pain and increasing disability, Harry became known for his patience, his warmth, and his quiet sense of humor. Friends recalled that he rarely allowed bitterness to define him, even as his own body steadily imprisoned him. By the time he died in 1973, at just 39 years old, nearly every major joint in his body had fused. Medical experts later estimated that roughly 95% of his skeleton had become immobilized by FOP. His case remains one of the most severe ever documented. Thankfully, Harry's story didn't end with his death because he decided to donate his body to science. Today, his skeleton is preserved at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, where researchers, medical students, and visitors can witness the devastating reality of a disease that quite literally builds a second skeleton. Standing before those bones, one question becomes impossible to ignore. If doctors now know what FOP does, why does the human body make such a catastrophic mistake in the first place? The answer wouldn't emerge until decades later, when a tiny flaw hidden inside a single gene changed everything scientists thought they knew about bone itself. Perhaps the cruelest thing of this disease is how incredibly unpredictable it is. For years, someone may seem relatively stable. Then, after something as ordinary as bumping into a table or catching a bad cold, another flare-up begins. It usually starts with swelling, warmth, and pain. Families who've lived with FOP for years often recognize the signs immediately. They know what may be coming next. For many patients, childhood becomes a series of impossible decisions. Should they join their friends on the playground? Should they ride a bicycle? Should they play football? Most children answer those questions without even thinking. Families living with FOP can't afford that luxury. One of those children was Jeannie Pieper. Growing up in the United States during the 1950s and 60s, Jeannie spent years without a correct diagnosis. Like many patients before her, doctors suspected everything from cancer to unusual muscle disorders. Some recommended biopsies, others suggested surgeries. Each wrong decision risked making the disease worse. Years later, after finally learning she had FOP, Jeannie refused to let the disease define her life. Instead, she became one of the world's strongest voices for families facing the same diagnosis. She helped build a community where parents who once felt completely alone could finally speak to people who understood exactly what they were going through. Because before the internet, many of them believed they were the only family on earth living through it. Imagine being told your child has a disease so rare that even your local specialists have never seen it. There are no neighbors to ask, no support groups in your town, no one who truly understands why a routine vaccination, a dental procedure, or even a simple fall could become a life-changing event. For decades, that's exactly how isolated many families felt. Around the same time, on the other side of the world, a Ugandan entertainer named Godfrey Baguma was becoming famous for reasons that had nothing to do with medicine. Newspapers called him the world's ugliest man. Television crews invited him onto their shows. Crowds gathered just to catch a glimpse of him. To millions, he became a spectacle, but Baguma was really just a man living with a condition reported to be one of the rarest genetic disorders on Earth. Like so many others affected by FOP, his life was shaped not only by the way people saw him, but by the relentless progression of a disease that could slowly replace movement with bone. Yet, Baguma refused to let his condition define him. He found success as a comedian and musician, married, raised a family, and proved that a diagnosis, even one as devastating as FOP, could never fully define a person's life. His story, however, was just one of hundreds. For every patient whose face appeared in newspapers or on television, there were countless others living in near anonymity, children whose parents searched desperately for answers, teenagers who watched their world grow smaller with each passing year, adults who spent decades explaining a disease that even many doctors had never seen. And that was perhaps the greatest tragedy of all. For centuries, medicine could describe what FOP did, but no one could explain why it happened. Doctors watched healthy muscles slowly transform into bone. They documented the symptoms. They named the disease. But the true cause remained hidden, buried deep within the human genome. Then, in the early 21st century, an international team of researchers finally uncovered the tiny mistake responsible for one of the rarest and most bewildering diseases ever recorded. It wasn't a virus or an infection. The answer had been written into their bodies from the very beginning, and finding it would change everything. The earliest known medical description dates back to 1692, when French physician Guy Patin wrote about a young patient whose body seemed to be growing a second skeleton. At the time, medicine had no language for a condition like it. There were no X-rays, no genetic testing, and certainly no way to look inside a person's DNA. Physicians could only watch as the disease slowly claimed more of the body. For the next 300 years, that was largely the story of FOP: observation, confusion, and helplessness. Even after the invention of modern imaging, many doctors still encountered the disease only in textbooks, if they encountered it at all. Most never met a single patient during their careers. A physician might spend decades practicing medicine without ever seeing one case. Then, one day, a child would walk into their office with painful lumps and swollen muscles. Cancer would often be the first suspicion. It was a reasonable conclusion. The swellings looked alarming, and no one expected a disease that affected only a few hundred people around the world. So biopsies were performed, growths were removed, surgeries were scheduled. Again and again, the same heartbreaking pattern followed. Instead of improving, the patients became worse. The very treatments meant to help were accelerating the disease. By the late 20th century, specialists around the world had finally recognized a painful truth. Sometimes, the best thing a doctor could do for someone with FOP was nothing at all. Medicine is built on action, tests, procedures, treatments, but FOP forced physicians to think differently. Every unnecessary intervention carried risks. Sometimes the safest decision was to leave the body undisturbed. Still, one question remained. Why was the body doing this? That answer finally began to emerge in 2006. At the University of Pennsylvania, Physician-scientist Frederick S. Kaplan had spent decades studying patients with FOP, alongside geneticist Eileen M. Shore and an international team of researchers. He believed the disease had to be rooted in a single genetic mistake. Finding it, however, was like searching for one typo in a library filled with billions of letters. Then came the breakthrough. The team identified a mutation in a gene called ACVR1. It was a discovery that transformed the entire field overnight. The mutation acted like a switch that was stuck in the on position. Signals that should have helped repair damaged tissue instead encouraged the body to grow bone where bone had no business growing. Suddenly, decades of seemingly random observations began to make sense. The malformed big toes seen at birth, the flare-ups after injuries, the worsening after surgery. Everything started to make sense. They were all connected by the same tiny genetic error. For families, it brought something they had waited generations to hear. An explanation. Maybe not a cure, but at least an answer. And sometimes, answers matter more than people realize. Parents who had blamed themselves finally learned that they hadn't caused their child's illness. It wasn't because of something they ate. It wasn't because of a fall during pregnancy. It wasn't because they held their baby the wrong way. It had been there from the very beginning. The discovery also revealed something unexpected about the disease itself. Doctors had long noticed that FOP followed a really unusual pattern. It usually began around the neck and shoulders, before spreading down the back, the arms, and eventually the legs. It rarely skipped randomly from one place to another. Even more puzzling, certain parts of the body almost always escaped. The heart continued to beat normally. The muscles that moved the eyes somehow remained untouched, and the tongue was spared. That realization immediately opened entirely new areas of research. If scientists could understand why some muscles were protected, perhaps one day they could learn how to protect the rest. For the first time in history, there was genuine optimism, because researchers finally knew what they were fighting. Around the world, laboratories that had never studied FOP before began paying attention. What started as research into one of the rarest diseases on Earth soon attracted scientists interested in something much bigger. Because if they could understand how the body accidentally creates bone, could that same knowledge help people who struggle to heal broken bones? Could it improve treatments after major injuries? Could it even change the future of regenerative medicine? Either way, the children with FOP were still growing older. Parents were still watching their sons and daughters lose another little piece of movement every year. And while researchers raced toward tomorrow, patients still had to survive today. Now, years after Harry passed, in the archives of the Mutter Museum, visitors sometimes stop in front of a single skeleton longer than any other. They notice the extra bridges of bone on it. The shoulders appear fused and locked together. It just looked really unusual. It is the skeleton of Harry Raymond Eastlack Jr., the man whose final act was to donate his body so future generations could understand what had happened to him. For decades, medical students have stood before those bones, but unfortunately, Harry never got to witness what came next. He never saw scientists identify the genetic mistake behind the disease. He never saw families from different continents finding one another online. And he never saw the day when, after generations of heartbreak, A medicine specifically developed for FOP finally became a reality. In August 2023, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved the first treatment for FOP. It wasn't a cure. It couldn't remove the bone that had already formed, but for the first time in history, doctors had something designed to help slow the disease instead of just watching it unfold. It was a moment many families thought they would never live to see. And if there's one thing that FOP has taught us, it's that there's something extraordinary about the people who live with it. Spend enough time reading their stories, and you notice a pattern. They celebrate the movements they still have. They invent new ways to cook, write, work, travel, and embrace the people they love. Many become experts at solving problems most of us never have to think about. Dr. Frederick S. Kaplan once said that his patients taught him as much about courage as they did about medicine. Decades of research weren't driven only by curiosity. They were driven by real people whose lives depended on someone refusing to give up. FOP is incredibly rare, and the odds of meeting someone with it are astonishingly small. Yet it forces us to confront a much bigger truth. Our bodies are performing millions of tiny repairs every single day, but most of the time, we never stop to appreciate how precise that process is until we see what happens when that precision is lost. Next, we're talking about a maniac somewhere in Japan who murdered an entire family and moved into their home with their bodies still lying around. If you don't want to miss that, like, subscribe, and I'll see you soon.